For as long as we've known her, Mary has been used to service cultural values. The Mary we know today is very much like a German goddess or elf queen from Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. In contrast, the historical Mary, illiterate peasant, nothing person, village girl from Galilee, was Mediterranean. Centuries later, the Mary fancied by the earliest Christians around 325 and after was an elite lady, but she too was Mediterranean, just like back in the Bible. The Marys imagined by the evangelists we name Mark, Luke, as well as the Johannine mother of Jesus called woman, are all Mediterranean. Despite the differences, and they are big, between these various New Testament Marys, one element remains constant: the same culture. The Mary of the earliest believers of Jesus was a Mediterranean Mary. Some of the gospel depictions of Mary are negative, and some are positive. But one thing is constant: Mary in the New Testament is always a Mediterranean woman. Where did the positive Christian thinking about Mary of Nazareth, the Mediterranean woman, originate? Certainly not from the earliest gospel, Mark. That document holds Jesus' biological family in contempt. Mary tries to drag Jesus away from doing what God wants him to do in that document. No, the roots of all positive Christian understandings of Mary originate in the infancy stories. Matthew chapter 1 and 2, but mainly Luke chapter 1 and 2. Now wait a minute. What's the focus of these Christmassy infancy stories? Mary? No way. Mediterranean Jesus is their focus, not Mediterranean Mary. And in earlier presentations, we talked about how these stories were produced. It wasn't from Western journalistic research practices and thorough investigation and looking for fact-precise material. Knowing what we do about ancient biographies, we can be confident that the irreconcilable infancy stories, Matthew chapter 1 and 2 and Luke chapter 1 and 2, were deduced, not investigated. They were deduced from the picture the authors had of the adult Jesus, crucified and risen Mediterranean hero. What the Mediterranean hero did as an adult, he must have done similarly as a child. If Hercules battled a great giant snake at the end of his life, then you can be sure, in this ancient way of thinking, that as an infant, Hercules also battled snakes. Same thing with Jesus. If right before his death and resurrection, Jesus turned Jerusalem and its temple upside down, you better believe he did that also as a child. Note that both Matthew and Luke depict Jesus this way as a youngster, even in ways that are impossible to agree with one another. There's no psychological development in the world of the Bible, folks. Children were adults in miniature. Therefore, an adult Mediterranean hero, when he was a child, he was that hero in miniature. No interviews were necessary to see what his life was like. No investigation was needed. You can deduce what his childhood was like simply by looking at what roles and status he enjoyed as a great hero as an adult. If Jesus of Nazareth is the risen Messiah soon to come, well, the stories of Matthew chapter 1 and 2 and Luke chapter 1 and 2 will flow quite naturally. So these infancy narratives are not fact-precise biographies. And the only reason we're talking about these stories is because they give us our earliest positive views about the Mediterranean woman, Mary. You will never arrive at Mary's immaculate conception or her glorious assumption without these two stories. And these primarily unhistorical stories really aren't focused on her to begin with. They're focused on Jesus. Instead, these details about her provided by these very late first century documents underscore Jesus' qualities as a Mediterranean hero. They amount to preflections of him, the risen Messiah. Didn't we see that when we talked about in an earlier presentation how Jesus' resurrection was thought to usher in the last days before the Israelite theocracy? That was going to be a time where Israelites expected young men to see visions and old men to dream dreams. Well, if that was true of the adult Jesus and Jesus was the same hero as a child, just in miniature, then you should probably expect old men to dream dreams, right? And don't you have that in the story of Matthew chapter 1 and 2? Luke does this sort of thing also. Luke depicts Mary in similar ways. She experiences a procreation vision. Why? Well, because that's typical for the Bible and other ancient Mediterranean accounts whenever gods or sky vault entities converse with women. Put yourself in the mindset of a Mediterranean male. Why would God bother talking to a woman? Only if it concerns the reproductive functions and gender-based roles. See? Because that's basically the way women were perceived to be all about. And isn't that what Gabriel's discussion is all about? In the social world of the evangelists, everyone knows that if you place a man and woman together, sexual relations are inevitable. They will behave as culturally expected unless they get prevented by social sanctions and other boundaries. The Mediterranean world of the Gospels is fiercely gender divided, from beginning to end. Mediterranean people believe that when cornered, a solitary female at first may try to fight a male off. Still, once he touches her, she will readily give in to his advances. This applied to earthbound males, if they confronted women in this way, and to male spirits from the sky vaults above. Read Genesis chapter 6, folks. Look what happens when the Lucan Mary is alone with Gabriel. Obviously, there's nothing lustful going on here, but the author understands and presents traditional Mediterranean cultural urgency to keep women always encompassed and guarded. This is a stereotypical, not fact-precise biography, folks. Mediterranean Mary is placed into a challenging situation here. Her response, which generates endless devotional fruit, is stereotypical also. Her words in Luke chapter 1 verse 38 really mean, according to the Mediterranean stereotype, "As you like." That's Mediterranean Mary, folks. Now don't blame Luke so much. He can't help being a Mediterranean male of his time. Because of her vision, the Lucan Mary can do impossible things for peasant women of her culture and rank. What impossible feats, you say? Like traveling alone from Nazareth in Galilee southward into Judea? That's impossible, folks. And we see also that her fetus is capable of doing amazing things that normal fetuses can't. Mary's fetus is apotropaic, capable of warding off demons. Even another extraordinary fetus, Elizabeth's son, can recognize Mediterranean Mary's fetus. Do fetuses really behave this way? They do in stereotypical hero childhood accounts from the ancient Mediterranean world. Yes, Israelites expected wondrous things from fetuses that became prophets. But please, don't leave your brain somewhere when you do religion, folks. Why does Elizabeth proclaim Mary blessed in her reproductive role? Well, because clearly Luke was an ace reporter who did his investigations thoroughly, as if he were an American journalist or historical scholar interested in just the facts, right? Wrong. It's because he expected her to behave that way in the spirit. It matches the Mediterranean stereotype. Why does Mediterranean Mary harshly bind up Jesus by swaddling him in the Lucan account? Because all Mediterranean children were treated this way in this authoritarian society. Therefore, Jesus must also be. And the author presents this detail as something significant to the shepherds. Why do all the Gospels present Jesus either talking down to his mother and distancing himself from her, smothering Mediterranean dominance? Because the historical Jesus actually did this? Maybe. But probably it was because this behavior was proper to a great hero whose honor, because of God, far outranks any lowly peasant earthly origins. You ever wonder why, unlike the Gospel of John, the synoptics say nothing about Mary being at the foot of the cross? Did you even notice this glaring difference between the fourth Gospel and Mark, Matthew, and Luke? Correction. John doesn't really say that Jesus' mother, named Mary, was at the foot of the cross. No, instead, he says that the mother of Jesus, an anonymous woman John never names, was there. That raises interesting possibilities. Did the author of the fourth Gospel we call John even know the name of Mary? He mentions that the mother of Jesus attended the wedding in Galilee, but she is never named. Why? It's from the Synoptic Gospels that we learn that Jesus' mother's name was Mary. Would we even remember her name at all without the tradition behind those documents? In John, the beloved disciple stands beside the unnamed mother of Jesus by the cross. Who are these two people? From the text alone, the only one that mentions this happening, by the way, we cannot tell for sure. Was John ignorant about who Jesus' mother was? He seems to have been utterly clueless about Jesus' belonging to David's line and the place where Jesus was born. But at least John acknowledges that Jesus had a mother. Paul did that also in Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. It was a fact that Jesus had a Mediterranean mother. That was enough for later authors to generate material about this relatively unknown woman, because they knew Mediterranean mothers, their own, and they had an idea of an ideal Mediterranean woman also. So, as the first 5 centuries passed, the church in Mediterranean style always presented Mary in a way driven by Mediterranean cultural values. She's always Mediterranean Mary. And she went from mostly unknown, typical Mediterranean peasant woman to idealized Mediterranean elite woman as time and theology rolled on. Eventually, through Germanic influence and medieval excesses, she became Galadriel. Next time, we will explore Marian hegemony.